Hello, good afternoon. We are so glad that everyone is here for Network's first webinar of 2019, our legislative update and agenda, our plan to mend the gaps.
We hope.
Yes, there we go. Sorry. We have lots of presenters today. We have Sister Simone Campbell, of course, our Executive Director, and many folks from our government relations team. So we have Sister Quincy Howard and Trelon Shorter, Jose Cabrera, and Sienna Ruggieri. And then I am Meg Olson, and I'll be talking to you about opportunities to engage with us this year. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There will definitely be plenty of opportunities to ask questions during this webinar after we have our policy presentations. So, but you can definitely type in your questions while the webinar is happening. We have a staff person here, my colleague Alana, who is tracking these questions, and she will pass them over to me when it is time for questions, and we'll be moderating. Just so you know, everyone will be receiving the recording of the webinar and the handout of the webinar after this. So definitely you'll have opportunity to watch it again if you wish, or share it with others, and you'll definitely have the notes. So today, just a quick overview. First, we will have Trelon giving us a look back at 2018, thinking about how we did. Then we'll have an overview of the 116th Congress and the political situation with Sister Simone. Then we'll have Sister Quincy talking about access to democracy. We'll have Jose talking about access to citizenship. We'll have Sienna talking about access to healthcare. Back to Sister Quincy for a livable income. Then we'll have some time for Q&A about the policies. And then I'll be sharing with you some exciting advocacy tools and then talking about our February recess plans. So for now, I'm going to pass it over to Trelon.
Well, thanks, Meg, and good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I am Trelon Shorter, and I am one of the lobbyists on Network's government relations team. And today I want to talk with you about the issues that dominated 2018 and take a closer look at our year-end victory. And once again, as a reminder, there will be time for questions at the end of our completed presentation, but you can always type your question into the chat box. When we held this webinar this time last year, it was 1 month after the GOP passed their dreadful tax bill for the wealthy elite. On the heels of a 3-day government shutdown, or should I say showdown, and 1 day after the president's first State of the Union address called for unity. And made much ado about nothing. At last year's webinar, we expressed our concerns about potential attacks on our Mend the Gap issues, and we asked you to be vigilant advocates because we were going to put network members to work. Immediately, we needed your help in getting Congress to raise the spending cap, fund the federal government fiscal year 2018, which was 3 months past due, and we asked you to help us pass a clean DACA extension package that included a path to citizenship. Although we lost that round, we were not defeated. And we later asked you to tell the president and former attorney general to end their heinous zero-tolerance policy that imprisoned children, and we won. We also asked you to help us ward off attempts to sabotage the 2020 census and the Affordable Care Act. And for now, we are winning both battles. However, in an effort to change the focus from Russia and possible collusion, the Trump administration launched a series of attacks on poverty via executive action. They proposed shameful policies that would impose rent increases for Section 8 recipients, limit public benefits to immigrants through public charge, and impose work requirements on Medicaid recipients. So now I want to take us to look at, I want us to take a closer look at a few of our victories. How exactly did we do? So the Democrats took back control of the House, and which gained us a net gain of 40 seats. For us, this is significant because it puts us in a position to propel our Mend the Gap legislative agenda. I know that Simone will be talking about the implications of this victory in her presentation.
Hold on a minute, Trelon, because we're getting message that there's a lot of background noise. So if folks are on the webinar through your phone, could we really ask you to mute your phone? Because somebody sounds like you're eating tortilla chips. And you're not sharing them with me, and they're my favorite food ever. So please don't make me jealous. Just mute your phone so that everybody can hear easily.
Using *6.
*6. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So we were just talking about highlighting some of the victories in last year. And like we said, the biggest victory was that the Democrats took back control of the House, which would put us in a position to allow our Mend the Gap legislative agenda to get a little bit more traction in the House. And like I said, Simone will be talking to you more about the implication of this victory in her presentation. Another victory that we want to highlight for you is around food security. And I know that Sister Quincy was leading our efforts in getting a bipartisan farm bill eventually passed in Congress with no new work requirements for SNAP.
Yay!
Which, as many of you know, this is a significant program because it serves 42 million Americans. We were pleased that the new law invests in work opportunities for program recipients, utilizes proactive rather than punitive measures to help families move out of poverty. And our work on this issue is not done, and we will be calling on you to help us ward off some administrative threats that we foresee that will be coming down the road. On criminal justice, I want to shout out the work that we did to help address racial injustice within the criminal justice system. And Joan Neal, one of our consultants on our government relations team, really helped keep the fire under our feet on this and really helped us lead the work within the faith community, and which also joined the secular community in advocating for this important issue. It took about 3 years or so to get the momentum it needed for Congress to pass the bill this December, and so we were pleased that there is a criminal justice reform package that takes a historic step toward eradicating mass incarceration. Some components of the bill that we like: it humanizes prison conditions and operations, prohibits the shackling of pregnant inmates and the use of solitary confinement for juveniles. It shortens mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses and lowers the mandatory 3 strikes penalty from life in prison to 25 years. Although it is not perfect, we hope to continue our efforts over the next 2 years to fully reverse outdated laws that will continue to incarcerate people of color at alarming rates. And then I want to take us to the next slide, which is really just a closer look at our victories by the numbers. So we had, well,
Technical difficulty.
There.
No, you did mine. You
great.
went too far.
Back up. Sorry.
No.
Okay.
So just looking at the numbers on how we did on our spending needs. So we have $130 billion increase in funding for non-defense discretionary spending. That is for both fiscal year FY 2018 and 2019. It's still unknown as to how things will result for 2019, but we are poised to see some discretionary programs in the non-defense budget plussed up. So we're pleased to report that out to you. We had at least 20 new members or additional members of Congress that scored 100% on our network voting record. In the Senate, we scored 8 votes, and in the House, we scored 7. In total, the 115 Congress, we had in total 192 members in the House that were 100%, and that includes 1 Republican. And then we had 44 members of the Senate that were who we are applauding them for their 100% vote tally. In closing, as you can see, we were very busy last year, and we will be even busier this year. We do want to thank you for all your efforts in helping us mend the gap. Every phone call you made, every letter you wrote, or meeting you attended truly helped. And so I want to turn us over to Simone, Sister Simone, who will give an overview of the 116th Congress and what can we expect going forward.
Well, as you've all already figured out, you've figured out that there's high drama and a presidential election cycle. Outside of that, I don't think much will be happening. Actually, we have a historic number of women and people of color in Congress, and I really want to underscore what a difference that makes. I'm sure everyone's seen in the news how Speaker Pelosi has done such a great job, but I think the benefit of Speaker Pelosi is that the feminine approach brings some additional tools as well as strong negotiation tools to the political exchange, and she is the mistress of effective strategy. And the fact that she has in her caucus a historic number of women and people of color is just really a great organizing principle for her, and I think will bode well for allowing the voices of many people who are left out of our society to have a chance to be heard. It's really exciting for us. However, having said that, we're also in the realm of divided government. The tension between the House and the Senate and the President we saw in the play out of the government shutdown. When Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republican majority in the Senate, was missing in action. He would make a public statement about the naming of a post office before he would get involved in any of the shutdown issues. And it's that fear on the, well, I took it to be fear. I could be wrong in my assessment about it. But there's a real Republican fear of the president and of getting on the wrong side of the president. So it's that fear that is driving much of this tension between the House and the Senate. And the House has a very strong proactive agenda that they're trying to pursue. The Senate, we haven't heard a word from, though actually there have been a couple of good hearings with regards to drug pricing, and where Sienna will talk about a few of the hopeful signs. As members of Network, y'all are going to have to be ready to know the difference between a visionary bill and the change that we might be able to accomplish. Many members of the House are working at putting out really strong, visionary, important legislation to try to set some new directions for our nation. Now, I don't want you thinking that they're not important, but you need to know what their importance is for. Their importance is for creating a 2020 conversation in the presidential cycle to actually gain momentum. So all this conversation around single payer in the healthcare, further reform in the criminal justice realm, getting housing policy out there, all those kinds of things, that is really all being done so that the 2020 platforms have some new energy, new perspective, and a new way to go forward. It's important, but don't get disappointed when they don't pass this congressional session. Nobody expects them to. However, there are bills on incremental change, like that we'll hear about, like some of the drug pricing pieces, some of the census pieces, some of the potential maybe tweaks around immigration, though that may be hoping for too much. But it's those incremental changes that we can look forward to actually accomplishing. Then we're facing a tight calendar. I know 2020 is a whole year away, but in congressional terms, it's a blink of an eye. So the action really on any incremental change that's going to make a move this session of Congress needs to be done before the August recess. So we're all going to be working flat out to get some actual things accomplished. 2020 politics is going to be front and center and alive and well when the first Democratic debate happens, and then we're off and running to Iowa, New Hampshire, and other frigid points in the next year's calendar. And finally, what's a question mark is we don't know how the Senate will approach their work. Last year, we were able to get a really good farm bill, partially with Sister Quincy's help, and all of your help for making the numerous phone calls, letters, and amazing work that you accomplished. But I want to say it was also because the Senate was willing to, as I say, act like grown-ups, and the adults in the room. We don't know how McConnell is going to take this going forward, or the rest of the Republican senators. They have a chance to really accomplish some good things if they can continue this sense that it's more important to get something done than to make partisan political points. The jury's still out. We don't know. So here's going to be one of your first challenges if you have a Republican senator, is to encourage them to continue the fine bipartisan work that they did in order to really accomplish something for our nation. My hunch is with the shutdown, they're going to be interested in proving that they can govern. They've got GOP has a tough election cycle in 2020, so they've got to show that they can do something. So that's going to be one of our talking points going forward. So those are the big meta-narratives. Now let's look at some of our specific issues. So let me turn this back. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, sorry, we're talking shutdown first. Our favorite topic around here. We're so glad to be out to work. All right. So who do I go to for shutdown? Oh, I do shutdown. Sorry. Have limited capacity here. All right, so what happened? The Senate Republican leadership, as I said, deferred to the president. And the real frustration was that the House kept passing all sorts of bills that the Republican bills that the Senate had approved in the last session of Congress that Mitch McConnell refused to put on the floor. That is just it. It was GOP refusal to do something that President Trump might not like. They refused to call his bluff. And that's a problem going forward. We don't know if they're going to change their position on this, but that's what happened. Both parties, I must say, played to their base, which means that compromise was difficult. But the irony was the Dems weren't even asking the Senate to compromise. They were passing Senate-passed bills, but they wouldn't talk to each other. McConnell was just plain missing in action. And the president persisted in his wall. Speaker Pelosi persisted in her $0 for any wall, and that's where the polarization was, though the bills they were passing were far from polarized bills. Messaging was very different from legislating. And finally, it's partisan politics has a consequence. I mean, the fact is the shutdown caused pain across the country. Where our new office is on a floor with HUD workers who weren't here for 35 days. And I put up a little sign when they finally came back to work saying, "Welcome back, missed you." But it was so dear how much people appreciated it. We heard a lot from our floor colleagues that it really mattered to them, and then heard stories about how traumatic it was for them, because many of them are low-paid workers who work paycheck to paycheck. The additional piece about the pain caused by the shutdown is we still don't know what's going to happen to contract workers who are not guaranteed reimbursement for that period. So we still have some problems. between now and February 15th. My hunch is they're going to come up with something. The big question is going to be, will the president be willing to sign it? My hunch is he will, because he really sort of got creamed in the last cycle, but who can tell? For me, the biggest question is, will the Senate stand up to him? Therein lies the question. So I have to say to you all, stay tuned, stay involved, stay engaged. We've got work to do.
And on involvement, I just want to thank everyone. In 48 hours, we had about 4,000 phone calls from network members to the Senate. We hadn't seen phone calls like this since 2017 with trying to protect Medicaid and defend the ACA. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and definitely stay tuned. Now I'm going to pass it over to Sister Quincy.
Hello, everyone. So glad to have you. And I am thrilled to be talking after moving on from the Farm Bill to be talking about, as Sister Simone put it, some proactive agenda. And I'm going to talk to you first about the For the People Act, which we're talking about it first because it is actually H.R. 1. It was Speaker Pelosi announced at the end of last year with the new Congress that this broad, bold democracy reform bill was going to be the first order of business for the 116th Congress. And it is actually the perfect example of what Simone was talking about with visionary bills that there's really slim chances that it's going to become law before 2020, but it's really an opportunity for us to focus in a positive direction and build momentum and set the table for some potentially really big changes. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I have definitely felt like our democracy needed a facelift. Let's just say a facelift or a complete revamp, depending on how you look at it. But so I'm really excited. This bill was presented. It was introduced on January 4th. So it was like, as soon as Congress met, this was on the table. And I can't stress how massive this bill is. It is 3 buckets of what I'm calling buckets of democracy reform. The first one, which is very broad, it looks at ethics in government. We've seen a lot of the shenanigans going on with conflicts of interest and just really shady behavior on the part of our elected officials. That we're learning there really aren't sufficient laws to prevent these. So that's what this first bucket looks at, is how do we get a handle on this? The second bucket looks at getting corporate interests or dark money out of politics. So we know that the legislation that happens is really the will of the people. And then the third bucket, which is really the focus for Network based on our Access to Democracy Mend the Gap platform, is about strengthening voting rights. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about that bucket, since that is going to be our primary area of focus here at Network Lobby, although we are supportive of the entire legislation. Just a second.
Hello, those of you joining us on the phone. We're so glad you're here. This means we have well over 100 people participating today, which is great. And you will still receive everything you need, the recording and the handouts after this. I just want to ask you to please *6 yourselves so that we don't hear your background noises.
Conference muted.
Thank you.
Okay. So I was just about to go into our favorite part of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which is the portion of the legislation that really looks at strengthening voting rights. So the way that the legislation tries to get at this is, the first one is by opening up access to voting. This would be measures like making it easier to register, same-day registration, making polling places more accessible, making voting day a national holiday, pretty straightforward measures. And then there are also measures that would look to ensure that all votes are counted. This would be things like banning voter purges, which we've seen in the last couple of elections. H.R. 1 would also look to make votes more representative, and this is getting at partisan gerrymandering, which I'm sure you all have heard about, which is the way that after the census, the party in power will essentially redraw the districts for voting. And we know that is very harmful because it essentially distorts people's representation to elect their lawmakers. And the last sort of area of focus for strengthening voting rights is secure election infrastructure and processes. This would be things like increasing funding for polling places and worker training for those who volunteer or are paid to work the polls. This would also include things like standards for the technology companies that make the voting machines, or potentially having paper ballots, essentially auditable systems for voting. So that is sort of a general idea of in improving the voting rights of people in our country through H.R. 1. I just want to mention, being such a massive legislation, this does mean that there are a variety of provisions in it, some of which are kind of like straightforward, potentially incremental laws like Sister Simone was talking about, and other ones really kick off much more complex reform processes, like, for example, Representative Terry Sewell, who I misspelled the name, excuse me, in the slide, but Representative Sewell will be introducing the Voting Rights Amendment Act, which kicks off a whole process that would essentially renew the Voting Rights Act, which has not had the same teeth and enforcement measures that it has had in the past. And it would also kick off a process to attempt to assert congressional authority to push back against the Citizens United ruling in 2010. We're going to continue to see spin-off bills from H.R. 1, which are essentially these small incremental pieces that freshman Congress people will be presenting. So there's going to be lots of opportunity moving forward to continue building momentum around all of these ideas, which we find are very popular in general. In fact, their polls show that they are popular on both sides of the aisle. You can just look to the mantra, drain the swamp. That's how part of the reason that Trump got elected is because people are tired of a lot of the things that H.R. 1 would actually be looking to reform. The danger for this bill is really having it painted as partisan when the reality of it is that it is the opposite of partisan. And in many ways, it looks to get partisan stuff out of our voting process. We have had the states have been building momentum and have passed many of the measures that are in this bill. So we know these are not new ideas, and states have been paving the way. So we're going to be looking to build on that momentum of states. We have, the bill so far has a record number of congressional co-sponsors. All but 8 of the Democrats in the House have signed on to this bill so far. So it's a sure thing it's going to pass the House. The only question is, will it get watered down in the process? And that's what we're pushing back against at this point. We've already seen that the GOP is pushing back strongly with messaging against this bill. McConnell, he wrote a long op-ed against it in the peak of the shutdown, so we know that they are very alarmed by the bill, and that for us is encouraging, actually. So stay tuned. We look forward to pushing this forward, and with your help, building a lot of momentum moving into 2020 and making it part of the platform.
All right. Thank you so much, Quincy. I'm going to turn it over to Jose to talk about access to citizenship.
Great. So I know Sister Simone talked a little bit about the shutdown, but I want to go more in depth because the shutdown kind of lured to a lot of what the immigration debate is about. So currently, the government is funded until February 15, meaning that in February 15, Congress is going to have to find a way to continue funding the rest of the government. And currently, what they did is they started a conference committee that will be talking about what the bill on February 15 will look like. There have been many talks, especially in the Senate side, from both parties that want to increase spending for the border, and also have hinted on the possibility of a TPS DACA solution in the negotiations for more funding for the wall. They've also brought up from last week a dangerous dangerous add-ons or changes to our current asylum system, and they're also hinting at renegotiating the changes of the asylum system in the deal with DACA and TPS. I also want to quickly talk about right now DACA and Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, as well as Temporary Protective Status (TPS), is hold up in the court system. I believe it was 2 weeks ago where the Supreme Court denied the White House request to review the multiple DACA cases that have happened in district courts all across the country. There is meaning that at the moment DACA is still present and people can continue to renew their DACA if their expiration is coming near. In terms of TPS, there's one current case that is protecting TPS recipients from Sudan, Nicaragua, Haiti, and El Salvador, and allowing them to extend their DACA after their due date. But there are 11 countries right now that aren't protected in this current TPS case, and some of these countries, their TPS will be eliminated starting the beginning of this spring of 2019. So let's look at kind of the two big things that Network will be doing in terms of access to citizenship for this year. Immediately, we're going to be talking about the shutdown, and we're going to be working on ensuring that there is no increase to boots, beds, and walls, meaning that we don't want more detention centers, more beds for the detention centers, and we don't want more ICE officers and Border Patrol agents, and we do not want to give more money to for the construction of the wall. We want to keep the current appropriations, the money that was appropriated from the original negotiations before Trump decided that he wanted $5.7 billion for his border wall. We also do not want a TPS DACA solution in the negotiation. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't want a solution for TPS holders and DACA recipients. We don't want to use their status as a bargaining chip or a negotiation to save one community while throwing the other one in the rug. Meaning that as a DACA recipient, I don't want to have status while my mother is currently being deported.
Can I just add one more practical thing on that, Jose?
Sure.
The other piece is all of the members of the committee that are negotiating this are appropriators. They don't know the ins and outs of immigration policy because they're not Judiciary Committee. So there's a pragmatic reason for saying don't touch TPS or DACA because they don't have a clue what they're doing, but it's also the stronger moral stance of families need to stay together. We need a real solution. It needs to be dealt with in its entirety. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, of course. And we also don't want to make sure that no changes are being done to the asylum system because we don't, right? There is a crisis right now that we are seeing at the border, and we don't want the changes that are going to further make the crisis even more. And then looking into the year in general, Network is strongly going to be working on a TPS Dream Bill that will be introduced hopefully in early March. This bill is actually going to get the DREAM Act and the American Promise Act, which was Congress's only bill last Congress that give us pathway to citizenship for TPS holders. This bill will, in a way, give Dreamers and TPS holder a pathway to citizenship, meaning that 1 million undocumented immigrants will be allowed to have allowed to get citizenship. Another big thing is still we're going to be working on the appropriations to ensure that we can reduce funding for boots, beds, and for the wall. and this appropriation we're going to be thankfully that we have a House right now. We have a little bit more way to really get those numbers and the money going to Department of Homeland Security to be reduced. And of course, we're going to continue our work to end family detention centers by the various ways the language that we hope to get in the appropriation bills, and by a lot of oversight that we will be doing.
Cool.
Great. This is Sienna Ruggieri. I'm one of the government relations associates, and I'm going to be talking about health care. So the midterms were crystal clear. Health care is a major priority. It was, in fact, the #1 issue in midterms. Typically, the economy is the primary focus of any election, but surprisingly, it was health care this midterm. So we're really excited to get to work on the mandate that the voters gave us.
I'm sorry.
We're going to hold 1 second.
Just keep going.
Okay, great. I'll just jump right into it. So a couple of things that have been on our radar for quite a long time at this point and continue to be a priority for us is, first of all, the ACA marketplace. We're expecting, especially in the House, a lot of oversight on the sabotage to the Affordable Care Act's marketplace in recent years. There's been a decrease in funding for people who assist people to enroll in health insurance. There's been decreased funding for advertising for the open enrollment period. There's been a lot of sabotage to the market, and the House will now be scrutinizing those actions. Concerningly, the uninsured rate went up for the first time since the ACA was implemented in 2017. There are now 27.4 million people who continue to be uninsured. Those most at risk of being uninsured include low-income individuals, adults, and people of color. So we are continuing to track and monitor this issue. There's also the Texas lawsuit. You might have heard that in the headlines. This involves a number of GOP state attorneys general who are arguing that the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate is unconstitutional. So we're continuing to track that. That'll be a huge factor in the ACA marketplace, and depending on the outcome of the lawsuit, Congress might get involved. We will keep you updated. With Medicaid, in a more positive note, 3 states expanded Medicaid in the 2018 midterm elections. Utah, Idaho, and Nebraska all expanded Medicaid, so that's a really positive sign that we're moving forward. Yay! More concerningly, states are starting to impose added work requirements on Medicaid. So in Arkansas, in 2018 alone, 18,164 people have been dropped from their Medicaid coverage because of these new reporting requirements. We are staying diligent on these actions. Obviously, these are state-level policies, but we just want to keep you updated of these new work requirements. If we can transition now into drug pricing, this is a huge opportunity for us in this Congress. There's bipartisan support for lowering prescription drug prices, and it was a huge priority during the midterm elections. As you can see, 94% of Democrats and 89% of Republicans say lowering drug prices is a priority, and many folks are having difficulty paying for drug prices, and they continue to skyrocket. Some of the most grievous cases include the hike in insulin prices. You might have heard about EpiPens. Something needs to be done. And many new members of Congress have made promises to lower prescription drug prices, so we want to hold them to it and help them take action. And it is crucial for them to hear your stories about drug prices and how they are negatively affecting you. So these are some drug pricing legislative proposals. There's going to be a lot coming out of Congress, especially in the House, so stay tuned. These are 3 examples of legislative proposals that are coming up. Can I see the slide? Okay.
Isn't that it?
Yeah, I'm just making sure.
Yeah.
Stay tuned on those. There's definitely potential for incremental reforms to drug pricing, and we look forward to taking action with you on this. Additionally, the new NAFTA negotiations are adding another dimension to drug pricing reform. If the current language of NAFTA 2.0 is approved by the Congress, it locks in current laws regarding the pharmaceutical industry, making it very difficult to achieve any reform. So that's an added wrinkle to drug pricing reform that we will have to stay diligent on. So put together, these reforms have the potential to make drug prices lower, and we do have the opportunity to stop the immoral and abusive tactics of the pharmaceutical industry.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with us on our technical difficulties. I am passing it back to Sister Quincy to talk about access to a livable income.
Well, hello. Another piece of legislation I'm excited about. As you all are aware, living wages has been a cornerstone of the Mend the Gap platform at Network. Unfortunately, we have not seen any good bills move very far under the last Congress and, in a while. And this has actually given us a chance to sort of look at what our policy platform is. And there's a suite of economic problems that suppress wages, and they require an array of policy solutions, which what you see here is a list to give you an idea of how broad the platform is. There are some straightforward policies, some are high-level market reforms, things like raising the federal wage floor, ending wage discrimination, strengthening the government role in the labor market. These are all ways that we at Network think you need to look at to get at raising the wage and getting people more livable incomes in the United States. We are particularly thrilled with the 116th Congress because already two of the policy tools that are really sort of stopgaps and necessary, very basic measures in our livable income platform are two of the first up bills in the 116th Congress. One is the Raise the Wage Act of 2019, and one is the Paycheck Fairness Act. The Raise the Wage Act probably sounds familiar to you all because it is essentially a reintroduction of Bernie Sanders' bill from the last Congress. It is got a lot of momentum. It was already reintroduced in the middle of January. It has close to 200 co-sponsors in the House. It is way overdue. We have not seen the federal minimum wage increase in 10 years. And in the same amount of time, food prices have increased by 25%. So the table is really set for this legislation to move forward. We know
invalid option.
Oops.
As was mentioned earlier, the Republican tax law of 2017 has proven not to be helpful for American working families like the Republicans promised it would be. We've also had some really highlight of the significance of wages with this recent government shutdown. So people have become keenly aware of how people are living from paycheck to paycheck and how precarious their situation is. And we've also seen lots of momentum building around the country in various states. Even in the last midterm election, we saw lots of ballot initiatives in unlikely candidates like Arkansas and Missouri, where they raised their wages by ballot initiative. It's a popular idea, and people recognize that it has been a long time coming and is way overdue. So unfortunately, we still have 21 states that are stuck at the current federal minimum wage, which is less than $8 an hour. And these tend to be the states that are also preempting localities from raising wages, like St. Louis being prevented from raising their wage in Missouri. So there really is a need for a national wage floor to, let's say, even things out and get us up to speed as a country. We know that workers are hurting. So super quickly, I'm going to go over the provisions for Raise the Wage Act. Essentially, it would gradually increase the wage floor to $15 an hour, almost doubling it by 2024. Unfortunately, by 2024, it would only be worth $13 an hour based on inflation, but still, that's good. Another key provision is that automatic adjustment would kick in once it reached $15 an hour, so that the minimum wage would not have to be raised in the future by Congress, but would be automatically adjusted to keep up with a typical worker's wages. So that's going to prevent future major growth in inequality between the lowest wage earners and sort of your average worker in the United States. It would phase out tipped worker wages, and it would also phase out the sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities and those under 20 years old. which we just think is the morally right thing to do. Our goal in the next few months really is to have this bill pass the House as is, and we want it to pass soon, and we're going to use it to build pressure in the Senate. We know that it's a popular idea across the country. And just super quick, because it was introduced today, which is the day after the landmark equal pay legislation, Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. We have introduced today by Representative DeLauro and Senator Murray the Paycheck Fairness Act, which offers a much-needed update to the Equal Pay Act of 1963. We know there's still gender pay gaps and discrimination in workplaces. This gets at some of the loopholes, like basing pay on prior employers' pay, as well as preventing employees from discussing their income with other employees. Things like that really do perpetuate discrimination and gender pay gaps in the workplace. So this is another bill we're going to be following closely, and we're, much like the Raise the Wage Act, looking to have it passed as is in the House and soon, and we'll be using it to build pressure in the Senate.
Thanks so much, Quincy. All right, we have a few minutes for questions, and I know people have been writing them in. Just a quick, how can I get a PDF of the webinar? So everyone who registered, you'll be receiving a recording of this webinar, and I believe we can put a PDF into that email as well. So let me double check that. If you can't, you can always email me, or you can email info@, and we will make sure. I think we also put the webinar up on our website, so that'll be another way that you can access this.
We got a great question. Are you worried about taking on too much? All the areas that were mentioned are super important, but does it spread the staff and volunteers out too much? Well, actually, I don't think it does. One of the joys of Network right now is that we've got this really great team, and the folks that you heard from and some that you didn't hear from each have our own area of expertise where we can dive deep, work in coalition, or work independently. The other thing that we're doing is, as our grassroots mobilization folks make more contacts, we get more connected, and our database gets more sophisticated, we're also able to help you work on the areas about which you're most interested. So we're trying not to run you into the ground with our enthusiasm. But we're really glad you're on this call. We're really glad you're committed to make the 116th Congress something special, and then to make 2020 even better. So I think we're right on target to be a very effective, focused, engaged organization that's really working to mend the income and wealth inequality in our nation. It's a critical factor if we're to move ahead as we the people.
Yeah, thanks, Sister Simone. I think this is a question for Quincy because it has to do with access to democracy. How do we advocate for a ranked voting system?
Well, it's a great idea, but it is not in the current legislation of HR 1 that I'm aware of. So I think that would have to be in a future legislation, quite honestly. Or, since HR 1 isn't really going to become law within this congressional session, realistically, looking at the Senate, there could be, I would think, ample opportunity to build on it. At this time, I haven't heard much talk about it.
Just so everybody knows, is Maine for the first time has a ranked voting system, so that rather than just voting for one candidate, they rank them 1, 2, 3, so that in the counting, if the third place person isn't selected, and I had this third place person as number 1, then what happens is they look at my second choice and it does get counted. It's a new thing in Maine, and it is, we need more states engaging in this sort of innovative work in voting that then can work its way up to the federal level. Maine doesn't have enough people yet to really be able to put pressure on the entire Congress to get it to happen, but Maine is leading the way yet again. So if you're really interested in this issue, the best thing is to push it at your state level first and get ready to go to the federal once it gets working.
Great. What can I do to support Network's 2019 agenda? That will be the last few minutes of this webinar, so just hang on a second. Are there any other questions? Oh, I know we have a few.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
So why don't I take this one first?
Okay.
Read that one. This one's easy. What's Network's position on Medicare for All? Well, could work, might hurt, might help. We're way more about making sure that everyone has access to healthcare without endorsing a specific plan or process at this point. The key right now with Medicare for All is figuring out the funding mechanism, and we won't endorse a program until we figured out that it can really work. It's a huge, important soundbite saying that in the richest nation on earth, everyone should have access to healthcare. That is a no-brainer. And if Medicare for All works, go for it. So because we're more wonky and we're more detail-oriented in our advocacy, we're not going to endorse a plan until all the details are worked out, but we're going to say everyone deserves healthcare. It's one way you can deal with it, too, if you want to. But if you want to go hog wild for Medicare for All, cool. It advances the agenda of making sure everybody has healthcare.
This is a question, I think, for Jose. Is DREAM/TPS realistic this year?
I think so. It is. I think the House will definitely will pass it, and we know that the fight really is going to be in the Senate, but we are ready to work the Senate and to help a lot of the senators see the value of it, but also TPS and DREAM or DACA are in a critical state where 1 million people are potentially going to lose their status, and the country has very shown that they are all in support of this. So I believe so.
Great, thank you. Sienna, what really is the temperature among Republicans regarding healthcare heading into 2020?
I think there's incremental stuff we have agreement on, and that's really where we think Network is the strongest. Like, as I mentioned, drug pricing, there is an overwhelming desire for further transparency, for tangible things that affect everyday people, like drug prices, to go down. So that's really where we want to focus our efforts, and that's where we can really use your help the most. It might not be the most glamorous year for healthcare, but it'll be an important year for healthcare. So don't lose faith if we, don't achieve those visionary bills that Simone talked about, but remember that it's those less glamorous details that get us to those bigger moments.
Thanks. Simone, do you think we have any plans to get involved with the Green New Deal?
Well, that's a great question. One of the challenges with the Green New Deal is that it's really green right now and not very fleshed out. So it's a little challenging to know what it actually is besides a talking point. I think what's really important is that we stay tuned, that we encourage the development of it, that it's part of the 2020 cycle of conversation. A couple of us were just in New Mexico and found the urgency of the reality with regards to fracking and other aspects of mineral exploitation. Laura's just written me a note saying that I should stress that our tax work includes a carbon tax, where we've been attempting, there was almost some consensus a bunch of years ago, and we're hoping that can be moved forward as a way of increasing revenue. But on the Green New Deal itself, I think we really need to flesh it out and encourage all those who are engaged in it to make details happen.
Thanks. And I think this is probably from a newer person, and we're so glad that you're joining us today. But this question about network and foreign policy, where that falls or doesn't fall into our agenda.
Currently, based on our current strategic plan for the last, 8, 9 years, we've been focused on income and wealth inequality in the United States. Where we do get involved is principally in the push factors for immigration and the fact that it's U.S. policy that has generated the movement of people out of Central America, a bunch of the trauma in what's called the Triangle in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Excuse me, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Sorry, Nicaragua, didn't want to give you a bad rap. And that's the place where we are most focused and involved. It also gets in when we get into some appropriations things to ensure that there is sufficient money available for state and USAID, but to a lesser degree. Many of you that were members, back when I've been a member since '74, so back in the dark ages, know that we had a much more vibrant engagement at different times, especially around the Iraq War, in my experience. But at this point, as somebody else noted, we're sort of overwhelmed with domestic issues. Mending the income and wealth gap is a huge challenge, and so we're trying. It's nice to know we're leaving something off our plate as we try to make a dent in really challenging policies.
I know there are a few more questions coming in, and we're so excited by your enthusiasm. I do also want to honor people's time commitment, and we are running a little bit behind. Feel free to email your questions to us, and you'll have my email address at the end, and I will share it with the appropriate staff member here at Network. But thank you so much. And especially for those of you on the phone who can't ask questions, please, I'm sure you know how to email us. So send us your questions and we will respond. So going back to the question, how do we get involved with Network's 2019 legislative agenda? So there's lots of ways to get involved. I want to make sure that everyone knows on our website you can get to our advocacy toolbox. So on our website, just in general, you can sign up for our action alerts, like the one we talked about last week, the government shutdown and 4,000 people made phone calls. So that's kind of your basic way, your very entry-level way to get involved with our advocacy. And we're always so appreciative for the emails and the phone calls and everything that you do at the eRoots level, right, that bulk. And I promise we don't send out too many action alerts. So please go and sign up for our action alerts if you don't already receive them. Today, hot off the press, our 2018 voting record was published. And I know Trelon mentioned a while ago that we had 192 House members and 20 members in the Senate receive 100% from us. 44 members of the Senate. Yeah. Goodness, woohoo, goodness. And those are folks who received a 100%. But we have ranked every single member of Congress from the 115th Congress. So we know some of our members left us in 2015. But our voting record tells you what bills we scored them on, and then what their score is. Very comprehensive. I know many of you wait for this all year. There's lots of things you can do with the voting record. And we have it on our website here as well. If you don't get our Connection magazine, you can go to networklobby.org/voting record 2018 and just download the voting record. It's great if you want to write a letter to the editor, either congratulating your member or if they got a lower score, maybe calling them out for a few of those votes. Quincy said we should, the good old thank and spank, right? So there is that opportunity. If you do have a 100% member, we can send you a certificate that you can deliver to their office, especially in district. In district offices love to have that. And I think it's also just a good way, too, for you to look at an entire delegation, especially as we're heading into 2020. And think about, where can your state do better? Where can your state delegation do better? And how can we hold everyone accountable? So there's lots of ways to get engaged with the voting record, and we're just thrilled that it's out. And special thanks to Quincy, especially for tracking all of that. And our big ask today is thinking about February recess. Both houses, there are lots of recesses. I think we have the gift of a recess every month in 2019. So there'll be lots of opportunity to do in-district work. What we're really hoping, since this will be the first big recess of the year, is that you can get in front of either your member or their staff while they're home between February 18th and the 22nd. We can assist you with making those meetings, and we are also going to prepare you for our visits. I think our two topics for this visit will be raise the wage and HR 1, which both of those issues our secular partners are also doing a lot of work around, and you'll have opportunities to connect across districts with other folks. We are going to have an in-district lobby prep webinar on February 13th, and that'll be with Sister Quincy. Oh, yes, for sure. That'll be with Sister Quincy, talking about the two issues in kind of deeper detail, especially that paycheck fairness. By then we'll know more about it. And you'll also have access then to leave behinds and talking points. And our entire grassroots mobilization team, there are 5 of us. So we'll divvy up, and help you prep with your team if you want to go in community to lobby. And there'll be other opportunities if you can't get a visit as well, to do drop-offs, to maybe write letters to the editor. So there's something I think that everyone can do out in the field in February, which is coming up soon. So, we want photos?
Yeah, of their visit.
Oh, yes, for sure. We definitely, of your visit, and we'll talk more about this on February 13th, but anytime you have any type of action, whether it's an in-district visit or a prayer vigil for TPS and DACA and family separation or anything like that, we really love having your photos. You can always email us photos, and we will put them into our social media. We'll highlight them in our Connection magazine. We really love to hear your voice. If you want to write a blog about something that you've done, or just about how what kind of work that you're doing with Network, there's lots of opportunities to engage with us. So, so stay tuned to hear more. You'll be receiving an email invite for the in-district lobby prep webinar. There'll be a whole process for you to let us know if you're planning an in-district visit so that we can support you as best we can. We're really excited about everyone, especially with new members of Congress, making those touches, helping us do our work on the Hill. So, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation, your questions, your enthusiasm. If you have, if it's a question that wasn't answered, or just, if you're not able to access the PDF of the webinar, or you just want to chat more about how to get involved, feel free to email me at molson@networklobby.org. And I will either be able to answer your question or connect you to the right staff person to continue working with you.
Great.
Great. All right.
So we say goodbye?
Yes, we can say goodbye.
Goodbye, Network.
Bye. Thank you. We appreciate you.
And webinar.